The November rain had stopped just hours ago, leaving the suburban streets slick and gleaming under the pale afternoon sun. 6-year-old Emma Whitfield stood shivering on the front lawn of what had been her father's house. Her small frame racked with violent tremors as ice-cold water dripped from her dark hair, soaking through the black funeral dress she'd worn to bury her father just 3 hours earlier. Her stepmother Karen stood over her, an empty metal bucket still swinging from her manicured hand, while her father's brother Robert lounged against the doorframe with a satisfied smirk playing at his lips. "Stop your crying," Karen snapped, her voice cutting through the cold air like a blade. "This is to wash away the bad luck you brought to this family. Your father's dead because of you, and we need to cleanse this house of your curse." The woman's blonde hair was perfectly styled, despite the violent motion of throwing the water, her designer heels somehow pristine on the wet grass. Robert chuckled from his position by the door, his broad shoulders blocking any retreat into the warmth of the house. "Should have used 2 buckets," he muttered, lighting a cigarette with deliberate slowness. Emma clutched her teddy bear, a worn brown creature with one eye missing against her soaked chest, her small fingers white with cold and desperation. "Mommy, please forgive me," she whispered through chattering teeth, though her real mother had been dead for 2 years. "I'll be good, I promise. Please let me come inside." The bear, now drenched and heavy, had been her mother's last gift before the car accident that had started this cascade of tragedy. Neighbors peered through curtains and cracked doors, their faces masks of concern and cowardice. Mrs. Henderson from next door started to step onto her porch, then retreated when Robert's cold gaze found her. Mr. Peterson across the street pulled his blinds shut with a decisive snap. The sound of an approaching engine broke through Emma's soft sobs. A black Cadillac Escalade, its chrome gleaming despite the overcast sky, rolled to a stop at the curb. The door opened, and Ethan Collins stepped out 6 feet of controlled power in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. His gray eyes, usually calculating and cold in business meetings, widened with genuine shock at the scene before him. For a moment, he stood frozen, transported back 35 years to another lawn, another child, another bucket of cold water meant to teach a lesson. "What the hell is going on here?" His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed, cutting through the suburban quiet like thunder. Karen straightened, her expression shifting from cruel satisfaction to wary defensiveness. "This is a private family matter," she said, attempting to match his commanding tone but failing. The girl needed to learn about consequences. Her father just died, and she needs to understand what that means. Robert pushed off from the doorframe, his posture aggressive as he sized up the stranger. "You should move along, pal. Nothing here concerns you." But Ethan was already moving, shrugging off his expensive coat as he crossed the lawn in 3 quick strides. He knelt beside Emma, draping the warm cashmere over her trembling shoulders, his large hands gentle as they tucked the fabric around her small frame. "Hey there, sweetheart," he said softly, his voice completely different from the bark that had challenged the adults. "My name's Ethan. You're safe now." Emma looked up at him through eyes that were startlingly blue despite being red-rimmed from crying, and something in Ethan's chest cracked. This little girl with her soaked funeral dress and desperate grip on a waterlogged teddy bear, she could have been him if Richard Whitfield hadn't intervened all those years ago. The name Whitfield had drawn him here today, to pay respects to a man who'd once saved him from a similar fate. Richard had been a young social worker then, fresh out of college and determined to make a difference. He'd pulled 5-year-old Ethan from an abusive home, testified in court, stayed in touch even after Ethan aged out of foster care. And now Richard was dead, and his daughter was living Ethan's nightmare all over again. The cosmic cruelty of it made Ethan's jaw clench. "You can't just take her," Karen protested, finding her voice as Ethan scooped Emma into his arms, coat and all. "I'm her legal guardian. Her father left everything to me, the house, the accounts, and her." The way she said "her" at the end, like Emma was just another possession, made Ethan's blood run cold. Richard Whitfield had been dying for months, though few knew how quickly the cancer had spread after his wife Margaret's death 2 years prior. Emma had been 4 when Margaret's car had been struck by a drunk driver on Route 9, leaving Richard to raise their daughter alone while battling his own grief. The teddy bear Mr. Buttons, Margaret had called it, had been in the car with her, somehow surviving the crash that had taken her life. Richard had given it to Emma that night in the hospital, and she'd never let it go since. When Richard remarried Karen just 8 months ago, Everyone had assumed it was for Emma's sake, to give her a mother figure. But Karen Brennan had been after something else entirely. She'd been Richard's nurse during his chemotherapy treatments, all sympathy and gentle touches when others were watching. She'd learned about the life insurance policies, the paid-off house, the savings account Margaret's parents had established for Emma's education. 200,000 in assets, maybe more, enough to transform a struggling nurse's life if she played her cards right. And Robert, Richard's younger brother who'd always resented his successful sibling, had been all too eager to help when Karen reached out with her plan. They'd moved fast after the wedding, isolating Richard from friends, controlling his medications, whispering poison in his ear about Emma being a burden, a reminder of painful losses. The neighbors had noticed the changes. Dorothy Chen, the elderly woman who lived 2 houses down, had seen Emma sitting on the back steps more and more often, locked out for hours at a time. Frank Morrison, who lived in the small apartment above the garage next door and survived on disability checks, had heard the yelling through the walls, Karen's shrill voice berating the child for imagined sins. But no one had called anyone, no one had intervened. It was easier to assume things weren't as bad as they seemed, that surely someone else would step in if it was really serious. The bystander effect in full suburban glory. Ethan Collins had built his fortune from nothing, transforming a small tech startup into a multi-million-dollar enterprise through sheer force of will and an inability to accept defeat. But money hadn't erased the memories of his own childhood, the hunger, the fear, the desperate need for someone, anyone, to see what was happening and care enough to act. Richard Whitfield had been that person for him, showing up at his foster home when Ethan was 15, offering mentorship and genuine concern. Richard had attended his high school graduation, his college commencement, had been the best man at Ethan's wedding before his marriage fell apart under the weight of Ethan's inability to trust, to be vulnerable, to believe that love didn't always come with conditions and pain. The divorce had been finalized just last year, leaving Ethan with money, success, and an empty penthouse that echoed with loneliness. He'd been in Europe on business when Richard's cancer was diagnosed, had only learned about it through a mutual friend weeks before Richard's death. The funeral invitation had arrived like a punch to the gut, another reminder of how success could distance you from the people who truly mattered. He'd driven out to the suburbs, planning to pay his respects and leave, maybe set up a trust fund for Richard's daughter. He hadn't expected to find history repeating itself in the cruelest possible way. Ethan carried Emma to his car, her weight barely registering in his arms. She was too light, too small for a 6-year-old, and he wondered how long she'd been going without proper meals. "Where are you taking her?" Karen demanded, following them to the vehicle. "I'll call the police." Ethan paused at the car door, turning to face her with eyes that had cowed board members and competitors alike. "Please do," he said quietly. "I'm sure they'd be very interested to hear about child abuse occurring in broad daylight. I'm sure Child Protective Services would love to investigate the bruises I can see on her arms, the weight loss, the psychological torture of throwing water on a child who just buried her father." His voice dropped lower, more dangerous. "I'm Ethan Collins. Google me. Then decide if you really want to make that call." The name clearly meant nothing to Karen, but Robert had gone pale. He grabbed Karen's arm, pulling her back toward the house. "Let him go," he hissed. "That's the Collins Technologies guy. He's worth millions. We don't want that kind of attention." Karen looked ready to protest, but Robert's grip tightened. "The kid's insured too," he reminded her quietly. "Accidents happen. We can be patient." The casual evil of the statement hung in the air like smog, and Ethan made a mental note to ensure Emma never came within 100 feet of these people again. He settled Emma into the back seat, buckling her in with care. The teddy bear was still clutched in her arms, dripping steadily onto the leather seats. Ethan didn't care about the seats. The drive to Ethan's penthouse was silent except for Emma's occasional hiccuping sobs. Ethan watched her in the rearview mirror, this small broken bird of a child, and felt something shift in his chest. He'd spent 40 years building walls, creating distance, protecting himself from the vulnerability that came with caring. But looking at Emma, he remembered being 5 years old and alone, 6 and terrified, 7 and wondering if anyone in the world gave a damn if he lived or died. Richard had given a damn. Richard had saved him. And now Richard was gone, and his daughter needed saving, And the circular nature of it all felt like destiny or cosmic justice, or maybe just the random cruelty and occasional grace of the universe. The penthouse was warm and modern, all clean lines and expensive furniture that had never really felt like home. Emma stood in the entryway, dripping onto the marble floor, looking lost and impossibly small. "Let's get you warm," Ethan said gently, leading her to the guest bathroom. He found his smallest t-shirt and a pair of sweatpants that would still dwarf her, but they were clean and dry. While she changed, he put her teddy bear in the dryer on low heat and started making soup, the one domestic skill he'd retained from his foster care days, when knowing how to make something from nothing could mean the difference between hunger and satisfaction. When Emma emerged, swimming in his clothes, she looked even younger than 6. She sat at his kitchen island, feet dangling far above the floor, and accepted the bowl of chicken soup with a quiet thank you that nearly broke Ethan's heart. "You don't have to thank me for feeding you," he said, sitting across from her. "Food, warmth, safety, these aren't privileges, Emma. They're rights. Your rights." She looked at him with those startling blue eyes, processing his words like someone translating a foreign language. "Karen says I don't deserve things because I'm bad luck," she whispered. "She says I killed my mommy and daddy." The rage that flooded Ethan's system was white-hot and familiar, but he kept his voice gentle. "That's a lie, Emma. A cruel, terrible lie. Your mother died in an accident. Your father died from cancer. Neither of those things was your fault. Bad things sometimes happen to good people, and it's not fair, and it's not anyone's fault. It's just life being difficult and painful sometimes." Emma's lower lip trembled. "Daddy said I was his sunshine," she said, tears starting fresh. "He said I made every day brighter. But then he got sick, and Karen came, and everything changed." She pushed the soup around with her spoon, gathering courage. "Are you going to send me back?" "Never," Ethan said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. "I knew your father, Emma. He was a good man who helped me when I was young and scared, like you are now. He wouldn't want you to be with people who hurt you. So you're going to stay with me until we figure out a better solution, okay? You're safe here. You can eat when you're hungry, sleep when you're tired, cry when you're sad. You don't need permission to exist here. You matter just because you're you." The next morning brought unexpected revelations. Emma's teddy bear, warm from the dryer, had developed a tear along one seam. As Ethan prepared to sew it, another foster care skill, something fell out. A small USB drive wrapped in plastic. Emma gasped when she saw it. "Daddy put something in Mr. Button's," she said, eyes wide. "He said it was our secret, that Mr. Buttons would keep it safe. He made me promise not to tell Karen or Uncle Robert." Ethan's hands trembled slightly as he plugged the drive into his laptop. The first file was an audio recording, dated 2 weeks before Richard's death. Richard's voice, weak but clear, filled the kitchen. "If you're listening to this, it means I'm gone and you found what I hid. Karen and Robert have been poisoning me. I know it sounds crazy, but I've been documenting everything. The medications they give me don't match what the doctor prescribed. I heard them talking when they thought I was asleep." There was a pause, rustling, then Karen's voice, distant but audible. "Just a little more in his tea. The morphine makes him compliant." Robert's response, "How much longer?" Karen again. "Doctor gave him 2 months. We can make it 2 weeks if we're careful. Then everything's ours, including the insurance payout." Emma had gone very still, her face pale. Ethan paused the recording, kneeling beside her chair. "You don't need to hear this, sweetheart," he said gently. But Emma shook her head, jaw set in a way that reminded him painfully of Richard. "Daddy wanted me to know," she said. "He said the truth was important, even when it hurt." So they listened together to Richard's final testimony documentation of forged signatures, changed insurance beneficiaries, medical records that had been altered. Richard had been thorough, even as he was dying, gathering evidence with the methodical patience of a man who knew he was running out of time but refused to let his daughter suffer for it. The last file was a video, Richard in his bed, gaunt but determined. "Emma, baby, if you're watching this with someone, I hope it's Ethan Collins. I asked him to come to the funeral, hoping he'd check on you. Ethan, if it's you, I saved you once. Now I need you to save her. Everything I have, everything I gathered, it's all here. Don't let them win." Don't let them hurt my sunshine. The video ended with Richard blowing a kiss to the camera, tears streaming down his hollow cheeks. I love you, Emma. Forever and always, no matter what. Ethan called Bradley Anderson, his personal attorney, within minutes. Bradley arrived at the penthouse by noon, his usually jovial face grim as he reviewed the evidence. This is murder, he said bluntly. Premeditated murder, fraud, child abuse. Karen and Robert are looking at serious prison time. But we need more than this. We need witnesses, documentation, a paper trail. He looked at Emma, who was coloring quietly at the coffee table, having retreated into herself after the emotional morning. And we need to ensure she's protected. They'll fight for custody to maintain control of the assets. The next days were a whirlwind of quiet investigation. Emily Carter, the local librarian who had known Richard for years, came forward with disturbing information. Richard came to the library a lot in his final months, she said, her young face creased with concern. He was researching poisons, medical malpractice, how to document abuse. He knew what was happening to him. He asked me to keep copies of everything he printed, said someone might come asking someday. She produced a box of papers, medical articles, legal precedents, information about chronic poisoning that matched Richard's symptoms perfectly. Dorothy Chen, when approached gently, broke down in tears. I should have said something, the elderly woman sobbed. I saw that poor child locked out in the rain last month, sitting on the steps for 3 hours. I saw the bruises on her arms when she wore short sleeves. I heard the screaming, but Karen always had an explanation. And I didn't want to cause trouble. Didn't want to be the nosy neighbor. I failed that little girl. I failed Richard. Her testimony would be crucial, Ethan knew. But the guilt she carried was eating her alive. He assured her that coming forward now was what mattered. That courage could come late but still matter enormously. Frank Morrison, the disabled veteran next door, was more direct. I knew they were bad news, he said, his weathered face hard with anger. Saw Robert slap the kid once when he thought no one was looking. Heard them talking about the money all the time. But who's going to listen to a broke veteran living above a garage? I called CPS once, anonymous tip. They came out, Karen put on a show, and nothing happened. System's broken, man. But Frank had something else, photographs. I started taking pictures, he admitted, through my window. Thought maybe if I had proof. The images were heartbreaking. Emma locked outside. Emma carrying trash bags bigger than she was. Emma standing at the window, looking out while Karen and Robert ate dinner inside. A visual record of neglect and cruelty that would be hard to dispute in court. I was building a case, Frank said, planning to go to the police once I had enough. Guess I waited too long. Karen, meanwhile, had not been idle. She'd hired Marcus Thompson, a lawyer known for his aggressive tactics and flexible relationship with ethics. She filed for immediate return of Emma, claiming kidnapping and interference with custodial rights. She gave interviews to local media, painting herself as a grieving widow whose stepdaughter had been stolen by a rich stranger trying to buy a family. I loved Richard, and I love Emma, she told reporters, dabbing at dry eyes. This man, this Ethan Collins, he's trying to tear our family apart during our time of grief. He has no right to Emma. She belongs with her family. Robert played the concerned uncle, telling anyone who would listen that Ethan was probably a predator, that no normal man would sweep in and take a child he didn't know. They filed restraining orders, demanded police intervention, created a narrative that started to gain traction on local news. Rich tech mogul in custody battle over orphaned heiress read one particularly salacious headline. The story spiraled, with speculation about Ethan's motives, his recent divorce, his lack of children. The court of public opinion was beginning to turn. But Bradley Anderson was a veteran of such battles. He filed countersuits for defamation, presented the evidence to the district attorney, and pushed for an expedited custody hearing. We need to get ahead of this, he told Ethan. The longer Emma stays with them, the more danger she's in. They're desperate now, and desperate people do terrible things. His words proved prophetic when Dorothy Chen's front window was shattered by a brick in the middle of the night, and Frank Morrison was jumped outside a bar, beaten badly enough to require hospitalization. The message was clear: stay quiet or suffer. The custody hearing was set for a Thursday morning, the courtroom packed with reporters and curious onlookers. Judge Patricia Coleman, a stern woman in her 60s with a reputation for seeing through lies, presided. Karen entered in a conservative black dress, playing the grieving widow perfectly. Robert wore a suit that didn't quite fit, his attempt at respectability undermined by the tattoos visible above his collar. Ethan sat with Emma, who clutched Mr. Buttons tightly, her small face pale but determined. Marcus Thompson opened aggressively, painting Ethan as an unstable rich man trying to buy affection and family. Mr. Collins has no biological relation to Emma Whitfield, he intoned. He has no legal standing. He swept in like some kind of vigilante, taking a child from her lawful guardians during a moment of family discipline. Yes, Karen admits to losing her temper and throwing water. She's grieving her husband, dealing with a difficult child who refuses to accept her authority. But that doesn't give a stranger the right to kidnap a child. The word kidnap rang through the courtroom, and Ethan saw several reporters scribbling furiously. But Bradley Anderson was ready. "Your Honor," he said, standing slowly, his presence commanding attention. "We're not here to discuss a momentary loss of temper. We're here to discuss systematic abuse, fraud, and murder." The courtroom erupted in whispers, and Judge Coleman had to call for order. Bradley continued methodically, presenting the evidence piece by piece. The audio recording played through the courtroom speakers, Karen's voice cold and calculating as she discussed poisoning Richard. Several people gasped when they heard her say, "Let him drink more. The morphine makes him compliant." Dorothy Chen testified, tears streaming down her face as she described watching Emma's deterioration. "That child went from bright and happy to silent and scared in a matter of months," she said. "I saw her locked out in the snow last December begging to be let in." Karen laughed at her through the window. Frank Morrison, still bearing bruises from his beating, testified from a wheelchair. "They're evil," he said simply. "Pure evil. And they'll kill that little girl if she goes back to them, mark my words. She's worth more dead than alive to them." Emily Carter presented the library documents, showing Richard's desperate research in his final months. "He knew they were killing him," she said quietly. "He was trying to gather enough evidence to protect Emma before he died. He ran out of time." The medical examiner who had performed Richard's autopsy was recalled, admitting that in light of the new evidence, certain findings were consistent with chronic heavy metal poisoning. "We didn't test for it originally," he admitted. "There was no reason to suspect foul play at the time." But the most powerful moment came when Judge Coleman, against standard protocol, asked Emma if she wanted to say anything. Marcus Thompson objected strenuously, but Coleman overruled him. Emma stood, all 4 feet of her, still clutching her teddy bear. Her voice was small but clear in the silent courtroom. "My daddy loved me," she said. "He called me his sunshine. Karen said I was bad luck, that I killed him. She hit me when I cried. She locked me outside when I asked for food. She threw water on me after we put Daddy in the ground because she said I was cursed." She turned to look at Karen directly, and in that moment, she looked far older than 6. "If you loved my daddy, why did you hurt him? If you loved me, why did you throw water on me when I was crying for him? Love isn't supposed to hurt. Mr. Ethan told me that, and I believe him." She sat down, burying her face in Ethan's shoulder, and half the courtroom was in tears. Even Judge Coleman had to pause, removing her glasses to wipe her eyes. The evidence was overwhelming. The audio, the photographs, the testimony, it painted a picture of calculated cruelty and murder that was impossible to ignore. When Karen took the stand in her own defense, she crumbled under Bradley's cross-examination, contradicting herself repeatedly, unable to explain the evidence away. Robert didn't even testify, sitting sullen and defeated as the case against them mounted. Marcus Thompson did his best, but there was no defending the indefensible. Judge Coleman's ruling was swift and decisive. "I've seen a lot in family court," she said, her voice heavy with disgust. "But rarely have I seen such clear evidence of abuse, fraud, and criminal conduct. Emma Whitfield is hereby placed in the temporary custody of Ethan Collins, pending formal adoption proceedings should he choose to pursue them. As for Mrs. Brennan and Mr. Whitfield, I'm referring this case to the district attorney for immediate criminal prosecution. Bailiffs, please take them into custody." The courtroom erupted as Karen and Robert were handcuffed. Karen screamed that it wasn't fair, that Emma was lying, that the evidence was fake. Robert said nothing, his face a mask of rage as he was led away. Emma pressed closer to Ethan, and he wrapped his arms around her, shielding her from the chaos. "It's over," he whispered to her. "You're safe now. They can't hurt you anymore." In the weeks that followed, the house that had been Richard's became something else entirely. Ethan purchased it from the estate, planning to transform it into something beautiful, a community center for children who had nowhere else to go. He called it Harbor Light Center, a place where kids could find safety in the storm. The renovation became a community project, neighbors coming together to atone for their earlier silence. Dorothy Chen sewed curtains for every window, each one bright and cheerful. Frank Morrison, recovering from his injuries, built bookshelves and toy boxes, his hands steady and sure, despite the lingering pain. Emily Carter donated hundreds of books from the library surplus, creating a reading corner that would have made Richard proud. Local businesses contributed furniture, playground equipment, art supplies. The place that had been a house of horrors for Emma became a beacon of hope for other children. And Emma herself slowly began to bloom again. She started school, made friends, learned to laugh without looking over her shoulder. The nightmares decreased, though they never fully went away. Some wounds, Ethan knew, never fully healed. They just became part of who you were. Scars that reminded you of your strength. One evening, as autumn turned to winter, Ethan found a letter Richard had hidden in the USB drive, one he'd missed in the initial review. It was addressed to him specifically. "Ethan," it read, "if you're reading this, then you've done what I hoped. You've saved my Emma. I know I have no right to ask anything more of you, but I'm going to anyway. Love her. Not just protect her, not just provide for her, but love her. She's lost so much already, and she'll need someone who understands that particular pain. You understand it. You survived it. Help her survive it too." The letter continued, "I've watched you from afar all these years, proud of what you've become but sad about the walls you've built. Emma could help you tear those walls down if you let her. She has her mother's heart, generous, forgiving, endlessly capable of love, despite the pain. Don't let what Karen did destroy that in her. And maybe, in saving her, you'll save yourself too. That's my hope, anyway. My last gift to both of you. Trust her, Ethan, and let her trust you. Build something beautiful from these ashes. With love and gratitude, Richard." Christmas Eve arrived with a gentle snowfall, the kind that made the world look clean and new. Harbor Light Center was hosting its first holiday party, the house full of children and laughter and light. Emma wore a new red dress, her hair in ribbons, looking like the child she should have always been allowed to be. She helped serve cookies, played with the younger children, sang carols in her clear, sweet voice. Watching her, Ethan felt something he hadn't experienced in decades: complete, uncomplicated happiness. Bradley Anderson arrived during the party with news. "Karen got 25 to life," he said quietly. "Robert got 15 to 20. They found evidence of two previous elderly husbands Karen had cared for who died under suspicious circumstances. She was a serial killer, Ethan. Emma is lucky to be alive." The relief was overwhelming, but Ethan found he didn't want to dwell on it. Justice had been served. The past was the past. What mattered now was the future. As the party wound down and the last guest left, Emma and Ethan stood in the living room of Harbor Light, looking at the Christmas tree they decorated together. Emma had insisted on putting a picture of her parents at the top instead of a star of Richard and Margaret on their wedding day, young and happy and full of hope. "Do you think they can see us?" Emma asked, her voice soft. "Do you think they know I'm okay?" Ethan knelt beside her, choosing his words carefully. "I think love doesn't die, Emma. It changes form, maybe, but it doesn't disappear. Your parents' love for you lives on in your memories, in the way you treat others, in the person you're becoming. They're part of you, always." Emma nodded, seeming to consider this. Then she turned to him, those blue eyes serious and searching. "Ethan," she said, "would you maybe want to be my dad? Not instead of my real dad, but like, in addition to him? Because I love you and I think you love me, and isn't that what makes a family? The simplicity of it, the pure truth of it, took Ethan's breath away. "Emma Whitfield," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Nothing would make me happier than to be your dad. In addition to your real dad, who I know would be so proud of how brave you've been." Emma threw her arms around his neck, and he held her tight. This child who had changed everything, who had torn down his walls and filled his empty spaces with light and purpose and love. "Can I call you Dad?" she whispered against his shoulder. "Yes," he whispered back. "Always and forever, yes." Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in white. Inside Harbor Light Center, a little girl and her chosen father held each other, surrounded by the ghosts of love and loss and the promise of tomorrow. The Christmas tree lights twinkled, casting rainbow patterns on the walls, and somewhere in the universe, Richard and Margaret Whitfield smiled, knowing their daughter was finally, truly safe. She had found her harbor in the storm, her light in the darkness, her home in the heart of a man who understood that sometimes the best families are the ones you choose, the ones forged in fire and sealed with the unbreakable bonds of rescued souls, recognizing each other across the divide of pain. Emma whispered something to the photograph at the top of the tree, too quiet for Ethan to hear. But he knew what she was saying because he'd said it himself, countless times over the years, to the memory of Richard Whitfield. "Thank you for saving me." And in the warm glow of Christmas lights, in a house that had seen such darkness now filled with such light, two broken people, who had become whole together, faced their future with hope. Evil had been vanquished, justice had prevailed, and love, complicated, messy, chosen love, had won the day. The storm was over. The harbor light would keep shining, a beacon for all the lost children still searching for their way home.